First of all, have you ever felt like a supreme sense of anxiety when you text a friend or a family member and they don't answer you back right away? Like your intuition sends up these little red flags that are like something is not right. Well, that is how this case starts for Megan's friends and family. It was this like paralyzing fear that hit them on July 1st of 2001. Megan was the type of girl that was never without her phone. She was always reachable. Her friends, in fact, joked with her and said that this was her lifeline. She never missed a call. She always told people where she was. However, that day, after celebrating the 4th of July the previous night before, she had hugged her best friend, Lizzy, goodbye around 2:45 in the morning, saying she wanted to go home and sleep in her own bed because she slept better at home and she had to work the next day. Sometime after that, Megan vanished. She did not show up to lunch for her dad that day. She never made it to work. But this wasn't the most alarming part for her friends and family. It was the fact that her voicemail was full. She had dozens of calls. None of them returned. And it actually got to the point where no more messages could be received. At first, her friends kind of brushed it off, like maybe her phone died, maybe she forgot it, basic things. And then they started to worry. And then they got afraid. Megan was described as cautious. She was the girl, much like myself, who wanted to be prepared for everything, every single what if. And for her to become suddenly unreachable was completely beyond the scope of what her friends could imagine. So let's rewind a little, and we're going to do that a couple times in this case. But it's July 4th. America is partying. Depending on where you live, fireworks are exploding. People are drinking. Some of them even driving. Don't do that. Accidents were not unusual on nights like this, and hearing a crash from somewhere else wasn't either. A night guard on patrol near New Los Angeles thought that he heard fireworks down by the bridge. The sounds were kind of faint and distant, so being the 4th of July, he ignored them at first. But when his route kind of led him that way, he thought, maybe I'll check. It was not a firework. It was just a Pontiac Sunfire crashed in the middle of the road's median, where it was stuck. Now I know what you're thinking, okay, just hold on. The engine is still running. The headlights are still on. The windshield wipers are still going back and forth and back and forth. The Sunfire's driver's door is wide open. And at first, the guards thought is like, okay, well, somebody was drunk and they got their car stuck and they panicked and they fled because they didn't want to get in trouble with the cops. As he looks around, he thinks, well, whoever it was must have been in a big hurry because even their shoes were left behind. One flip-flop lay a few feet away on the ground, and the right one was upside down on the floorboard of the car on the driver's side. But what caught this guard's eye the most, and actually, he said, froze him in place, was the blood. It was everywhere and still wet. On the steering wheel, across the driver's seat, pooling on the floor. Whoever had been in this car was badly hurt. So the guard immediately calls 911, and with within minutes, police officers arrive. Detective Rick Barroso and Tim Lawrenson were among the first to the scene. So what looked like an abandoned car was now a crime scene. This vehicle was riddled with bullet holes, and they were mostly concentrated on the driver's side windshield. The side window to the car had been shattered, with glass scattered across the seat, the road, and the window frame. The hood and the driver's door were also marked with bullet holes, and the back of the car too. With that much blood inside the car, detectives were sure that the driver had been hit. But even stranger about this whole thing is there's no blood on the outside of the car. Like, there's no trail of blood. None. You would expect to see some drops, like trailing, if someone who was wounded had walked away. But the ground around the car was clean. The only thing that the police officers found outside the car was the aforementioned flower flip-flop. So this strange inconsistency causes detectives to look deeper. They examine the car's body and they notice a long scrape along the driver's side, stretching from the door to the back. It looks as though another vehicle had sideswiped the car before the car had gotten stuck on the median. So they photograph every single inch of the scene to preserve the evidence, and these photos are online mostly, I believe. I'm not sure the ones with the blood are, but inside of the car, on the passenger seat, they find a small blue and white purse. It is open. It is streaked with blood around the zipper and the edges. However, there's no ID inside of it. On the floor lay one of those it wasn't old at the time, but one of those really old Nokia brick cell phones. I had one of those. It was my first one. And it has blood on it as well. The screen is face down, and on the back of it, a sticker that read, "Angry Girl." From the flip-flops, the phone, and the purse, the officers realized that the driver was a woman, and she's hurt. But where did she go? The entire scene is sealed off, and CSI starts scouring the road for more clues. Within minutes, they find 5 shell casings near the highway exit, and another one about 30 meters away, close to where the car had stopped. And what was strange about these were that they were green, but we'll talk about that later. CSI continues to search while detectives start looking deeper into the car's records. They discover that it is a rental car that had been signed out just a couple of days earlier by 20-year-old Megan Barroso. They hand over her license and full details. So from that moment, the search for Megan turns into a desperate race against time to find her while she's still alive. The blood inside the car wasn't enough to specifically say that Megan had passed away in the car, but no hospital reported that she had been admitted either. So it is clear to the police that Megan has been forced off of the road, shot, wounded, and then taken by an unknown assailant. The only hope left for her was to be found, and quickly. And imagine this being your child. You hear that she's vanished. Her car is found soaked in blood and riddled with bullets. Suzanne described Megan as a busy child, not physically, but mentally. She observed quietly, she processed deeply, and she stored every detail in her mind like this running notebook. Her father, Arturo, was the kind of dad who valued every single moment with his daughter. He didn't hide behind pride or distance. He loved openly. And he did the cutest thing while Megan was still a toddler. He would rush home on his lunch breaks just so he could hold her for a couple of minutes. And the second that she heard the front door open, her tiny little feet would start bouncing with excitement because she knew that her dad was home. And Arturo said that even years later, the smell of baby shampoo would take him right back to those afternoons and the sound of her laughter. As she got older, Megan became one of those girls that drew attention without even trying. Her quiet, focus, and thoughtful nature made people notice her. She had an older brother named AJ, and I can only describe their relationship as complicated. He felt like Megan knew how to get their mom's attention, and that he got shoved aside, and he had some resentment against Megan for that. On the other hand, Megan saw AJ as kind of cold and distant. So, not every sibling bond is perfect. Theirs wasn't, mine isn't. But sometimes the two of them found common ground when they couldn't stand one of their babysitters. Small things like that reminded them that they were still family. So from the outside, the Barroso family looked perfect. Loving parents, healthy kids, a comfortable home. But you know, we've said a million times, all that glitters isn't gold, and eventually Megan's parents got divorced. She was still pretty young at the time, and this split changed her daily life completely. Both parents worked really hard to keep the family from falling apart. Megan mostly lived with her mother, but her dad never disappeared from her life. He visited often and made sure that his children knew that they were deeply loved. So Susan kind of noticed that her daughter was quiet and inward by nature, and she decided to enroll Megan in dance classes at the age of 7, which is actually kind of late for dance classes, I believe. The style was Irish step dancing or clogging, and this became Megan's greatest passion in life. She truly came alive on the dance floor. She could pour out all of her emotions and energy and harness some of that creativity. Susan herself had been a dancer when she was younger, and sometimes they even performed together on stage. Now for Megan, dancing really became more than just a hobby. It is now where she was developing a circle of friends. She met her best friend, Cricket Esther, in dance class. From Megan's very first class, Cricket's mom noticed how the two just naturally connected, and their friendship got stronger every single day. They laughed, they had inside jokes and late night phone calls in which one of the parents would be like, "All right, hang up and go to bed." So through middle school and high school, Cricket and Megan's bond just deepened. They studied together, they talked about boys, their dreams, school gossip, and life. And this was the kind of friendship that people described as unbreakable. Unfortunately, the summer before senior year, life took a sharp turn for the Barroso family. Both of Megan's parents lost their jobs at the state hospital, and her mother made the choice to move them to another city hours away for a new job. And for Megan, leaving her school and her dance classes, this just felt unbearable. And so she actually moved in with Cricket's family for a while, hoping to finish high school that way. But Megan's grades master's and dreaming of transferring to a 4-year university to study something like her mom, who was working on her master's in social work. So, meanwhile, Megan is working part-time and keeping a careful balance between school and life. She truly came into her own at this point. Her friends used to joke that she and her phone were inseparable, like I said. She was always available, always answering, always there for her friends. Now, if you think about this case, in the early 2000s, that kind of connection wasn't really common yet. I did not have a cell phone in 2001. I didn't get mine till 2003. But Megan wanted a way to stay in contact with everyone that she cared about. She was a realist. She always thought ahead and prepared for the what-ifs. Not because she was pessimistic, but because she liked to be ready. It was just part of her nature. Megan, of course, had her quirks too. She still kept her childhood blanket. She called it Blankie. She ate ice cream from a coffee mug and lost her stuff constantly, and listened to music everywhere she went. Her bond with her family stayed strong even though she wasn't living with them. She adored visiting her dad and doting on her new baby brother, Christian. Despite the 20-year age gap, Megan loved being a big sister, and she often dropped by her dad's office on her lunch break to dote on her little baby brother, kind of a sweet echo of her own childhood when her dad used to come home just to hold her. So life had found its rhythm again. She'd reconnected with Cricket as if no time had passed, and the two of them spent hours just laughing and talking and re-bonding. Megan also started meeting new people, building a stronger social circle. But by early July of 2001, everything in her life was aligned. She was independent, loved, full of plans and dreams for the future. Her 21st birthday was just around the corner, and she was ready for whatever came next. But no one could have known that everything that she'd built, everything she loved, would be destroyed by something that nobody ever saw coming. So back to the 4th of July, Megan had been out celebrating, unaware that just hours later her life would just be a nightmare. When Arturo heard the news, it didn't come through a call or a text. Detectives came straight to his door, and they told him about the blood, the bullets, and the car still running, but empty. And his heart broke instantly. Megan was his responsible one, the dependable one. Why would anyone want to hurt her? He started to search for any explanation that made sense of what had happened, and her mother, Suzanne, reacted the same way. Devastated, physically sick after realizing why all of her calls were going unanswered. So they had been worried since the night of July 4th when Megan had let them know where she was, and then an hour of silence had gone by. Her friend Lizzy, that she'd been out with that night, felt the same. The next morning, she checked her phone over and over, hoping for a missed call, a text, something. Detectives start to quickly piece together the last hours of Megan's life. Her parents had told them she had a small, close circle of friends, people that she trusted completely, and they said none of them could possibly be suspects. So they start with Lizzy, who had been with Megan that night. When detectives broke the news to her, she screamed, and through tears said that she would do anything she could to help. And she described everything in detail, knowing that even the smallest one might matter. And this girl is incredible. Everybody needs a friend like this. It's July 4th, 2001. conversation. They thought maybe he had followed Megan or had known where she had gone that night, and it wouldn't have been hard for him to follow her. So when they questioned him, yes, he admitted to liking her and he wanted to know her better, but he insisted that he never left his house all night, and several people confirmed this. So he was crossed off the list. On July 5th, when the rental car was found, search efforts expanded. Police and volunteers combed the surrounding fields, roads, and ditches, but they found nothing. And then they brought in the canine units. One dog picked up Megan's scent from her sandal and started to track. But suddenly, the trail went cold, as if it had vanished into thin air. And that was a red flag because it suggested that Megan had not walked away on her own, that she had likely been pulled out of her own car and forced into another vehicle. There were even scratch marks on the side of her car that hinted at a forced collision. Reconstructing the scene, detectives theorized that someone had tried to make her pull over. When she refused, they opened fire on her car to force her to stop. As I said before, the recovered casings were green. This is an uncommon color, and it immediately stood out to the police. Near the shattered glass of the passenger side window, they found a metal rod. And at first, nobody really knew what it was, but they bagged it and they had it analyzed, and it turned out to be a gun cleaning rod. The kind that comes with military-grade weapons, not personal ones. This changes everything. This person had not used some basic thing, but an AK-47, designed for combat, precision, and lethal speed. So it is clear to the police at this point that Megan had been hunted. But by who? And why? So they bring out all that they can do. Helicopters circle, they scan with infrared technology, but the ground stays dark. Then another breakthrough. Investigators discover that Megan's rental car had basically what's described as a black box. It stores key driving data, speed, braking, distance, and stops. This could tell them what happened second by second. So when they analyze it, they are absolutely horrified. 5 seconds before the crash, Megan's car had been stopped at an exit, probably waiting for a red light. And then suddenly, the gas pedal slams to the floor, and the car shoots forward at full speed. Minutes later, after a sharp turn, the car loses control and hits the curb. So this data tells a story. Megan had been terrified, trying to escape the hail of bullets fired directly at her as she was stopped at a red light. Bullet casings were found in the road, and holes in the windshield lined up perfectly with where her head would have been. 2 more rounds hit the sides of her car. At this point, ballistic experts are brought in. A reconstruction officer meticulously maps the scene, measuring every fragment of glass, every bullet casing, and even the sandal found near the driver's door, and the metal gun cleaning rod discovered nearby. Using laser point trajectory, they traced the exact path of every bullet. And in 2001, this is like cutting-edge technology. Red beams showed how every shot entered the car. The height, the angle, the direction, and it was horrifying to see how close these bullets had come to Megan's body. Based on the blood inside the car, one of the shots had hit her in the chest or abdomen. So, from this laser mapping, investigators believed that the attacker had rammed were no blood trails on the ground. It had been sudden, brutal, and terrifyingly precise. Once the reconstruction was finished, Megan's car was sent to the lab for further forensic testing. This story exploded in the news. Every major outlet covered it, and the public was desperate for updates. Police set up roadblocks, questioned drivers, hoping someone had seen or heard something. At least 8 witnesses reported seeing something unusual that morning, but none of them had stopped. One man said he saw the car at 3:55, just minutes before a security guard had discovered the scene and called 911. He thought the same thing the guard did, that the driver had gotten drunk and had a crash and fled. The earliest sighting came at 2:55. The witness had actually pulled over to check. He saw a car sitting oddly on the road and glass scattered everywhere, and the single sandal. But like others, he assumed it was just a drunk driving accident and drove away. No one realized what had really happened. Maybe today, with everybody obsessed with true crime, somebody would have called it in, but back then, no one noticed the bullet holes that should have screamed danger. Detectives issue a public appeal for information. They promised Megan's family they wouldn't stop until she was found. But days turned into weeks, and there was still no trace of her. Every ring of the phone jolted her family, their hearts caught between hope and dread. Each false lead hit them harder than the last. Megan's father, Arturo, worked closely with detectives, chasing every tip, every rumor. He was like a man possessed. He was driven with purpose, but also haunted by this, not just for his daughter, but for everyone else. Arturo was living in 2 worlds, one in which he searched for his daughter, and one in which he tried to hold his family together. His other 4 children still needed him. 2 of them old enough to sense the terror in their father's eyes, but 2 young to understand that their sister might never come home. The only thing that kept him going was hope. He repeated to himself, until proven otherwise, Megan is alive. Behind the scenes, the detective refused to give up. This case was full of holes, starting with the biggest one. Why Megan? Every part of her life was examined. Friends, family, relationships, routine, even study habits. But nothing stood out. She wasn't into risky behavior. She didn't have a jealous boyfriend. They couldn't find any enemies. She was a hardworking student with a summer job and plans for her future. Hundreds of tips flooded in, so many that the team couldn't keep up at one point, but one call stopped them cold. The caller claimed that he had seen a man forcing a woman who looked like Megan into the trunk of a maroon car late that night. And the location that he described was pretty infamous, a remote mountain area known as a dumping ground for murder victims. Police immediately several months. Could it be Megan? The coroner quickly confirmed that the skull belonged to a man. But the discovery exposed a disturbing truth. Those quiet hills held more than one secret. The remains were linked to another unsolved disappearance from the year before, which meant that this place had seen death before. Megan's father was desperate to keep national attention on his daughter's case. He even scheduled an appearance on the early show to reach more people. But on July 16th, just before airtime, the producer called. The interview was canceled. The order came directly from the sheriff's department. Officials argued that it wouldn't help to make this case go national, that they needed to control local leads and avoid being buried in false tips. Logically, it makes sense, but to a parent, it felt like betrayal. The next day, July 17th, the sheriff's office announced a $25,000 reward for information leading to Megan's discovery. By the end of the month, they launched a website to share updates, to collect further donations, and involve the public. Police released Megan's full description, height, weight, the clothes, and a special task force was formed, 20 members, each an expert in their field. From canine units to homicide detectives to major crime specialists. And assisting them was a name that I was familiar with, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to stop researching true crime. Was one of California's top criminal profilers, a woman named Sharon Hagen. She was the only certified criminal profiler in the state at the time. Sharon was known for seeing patterns in what other people would describe as chaos. She had the kind of mind that could stare into the darkness and put a name to it. And this case was about to need that. Sharon is still active in her career, but in 2001, she already had over a decade of profiling experience. What made her really stand out was she's self-taught. She trained herself in criminal investigation and crime scene analysis before joining the FBI's National Center for Analysis of Violent Crime, which is crazy to me. Later, she earned a PhD in clinical psych and worked on dozens of high-profile cases, helping prosecutors and police identify exactly what kind of person they were chasing. Her work went far beyond California. Departments across the United States sought her expertise. So detectives were thrilled to have her helping with Megan's case. Everyone knew that the chances of finding Megan alive were slim, so the focus had shifted to recovering her body and delivering justice. Criminal profilers like Sharon are usually called in when there's no suspects. They analyze every crime scene, every trace of evidence or lack thereof, witness statements, and they build kind of a psychological picture of their perpetrator. Personality traits, behavior patterns, possible motives. For instance, if a series of burglaries happen in the same neighborhood under similar conditions, all on second floors between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., through glass balcony doors with the thief leaving a specific signature behind, a profiler might deduce that the suspect doesn't have a steady job since they're breaking in during work hours and has significant experience because they enter and exit unseen. So Sharon wants to know what kind of person would commit this crime. We already know that this attacker is bold. What he did mattered more to him than getting caught, and his motive was likely sexual. Why? Well, Megan was young, attractive, and alone, and vulnerable, in the dark. It's a public area, a road where others could easily pass by, and this man Sharon's actions and snapped in anger. But Sharon really saw something deeper. She noticed patterns similar to other cases that she'd worked on. Crimes that were rooted in obsession and control, not random fury. And the fact that Megan had been taken from the crime scene was a crucial clue. Her logic was simple. If it had just been road rage and argument, why take her? Why take that risk? The only reason to remove her from the scene was to do something private to her. That idea refamed the case completely for police officers. It meant that they would start digging into local offenders, interviewing each one to see if anyone had a gap in their timeline that night. There was one big detail that made investigators hesitate, though. The weapon. This weapon is loud, large, and impossible to miss. It's kind of the opposite of what predators typically rely on. They prefer control, stealth, silence. This attack was explosive and chaotic. The shooter was furious, reckless, and unconcerned about being seen. But as I said, Sharon wasn't ordinary. She specialized in the psyche of violent offenders, and her instincts rarely missed. Coincidentally, the last two cases that she had worked on involved the same suspect. One, a serial arist, and the other, a random murder of a young woman chosen by chance. That connection was exactly the kind of pattern that Sharon never ignored. She used another case as an example to make a chilling point. It was not rare for an attacker to choose a victim at random, assault them, and then move them to a second location. Detectives often say the same thing. You know it. I know it. Never let them take you to a second location, because that is usually where people disappear for good. And it was possible, she argued, Megan had been taken somewhere private, away from any witnesses. Weeks passed since Megan vanished, and no one knew if she was dead or alive. Everyone agreed she'd been hurt, but hope still lingered. Investigators began to search for similar attacks that were recently involved with women, and just days later they found one. On July 10th, less than a week after Megan's disappearance, another young woman had been attacked, and Sharon immediately noticed the MO looked eerily familiar. This new victim, 22-year-old Dana, set out one evening for a short walk to her boyfriend's house. She had taken the same route countless times and she felt safe. Halfway there, a man suddenly jumped from the bushes, pushed a knife to her throat, and whispered, "Don't scream." He demanded money, and she told him that she had none. Terrified, she watched as he made her throw her phone into the bushes to stop her from calling for help. The street was dimly lit, but she could still see him, dressed all in black, wearing gloves. A Ford sat nearby, idling, its cream-colored interior glowing faintly. Before Dana could react, this man duct-taped her ankles, handcuffed her wrist, and shoved her into the car through the driver's side door. Inside the cramped, suffocating car, the driver barked orders at her. When she hesitated, his calmness turned to rage. He demanded obedience, and his anger exploded when she froze or hesitated, asking in this chillingly quiet tone why she stopped. He drove her to a house where the windows were covered by thick curtains. Once inside, he forced her to undress, and he assaulted her. And then, disturbingly, his tone softened. He told her that her boyfriend ask Josh to show them the weapon. He agrees, and he takes them to the house that he shares with Vincent. When he opens the case, officers notice something kind of strange. The casings were green-tipped, identical to the ones found beside Megan's abandoned rental car. But this isn't the same jurisdiction, and these officers have no idea who Megan is. They're simply following up on a burglary report cataloging stolen items like jewelry and pew-pews. They left that night unaware that they had just touched the edge of something much darker. Meanwhile, Vincent sits in his cell waiting for formal charges. None of the stolen property had been recovered yet, but that night he made a call from jail to his roommate Josh, and his tone is calm but urgent, and he says, "Can you do me a huge favor? There's a bag in the recycling bin outside. Can you get rid of it? Don't ask questions, just get rid of it for me." Trash pickup wasn't for a few days, and Vincent was clearly worried about what was inside this bag. So Josh is already cooperating with the police, lies and says, "Yeah, man, I'll take care of it for you." But curiosity gets the better of him, and believe me, he regrets it later. He thinks maybe this bag contains the stolen goods, so he opens it. But there's no weapons, no jewelry, no money. Just a pile of VHS tapes. The kind that people use before digital cameras, right? So Josh takes them inside, slides one into the VCR, and presses play. What appears on the screen makes his stomach twist. Here's Vincent, his roommate, his friend, wearing a ski mask, assaulting young women. This footage was graphic and cruel and horrifying, and Josh wasn't guessing. He knew this voice. He knew it was Vincent. In these tapes, Vincent yells at his victims and orders them to perform degrading acts. Sometimes he seemed to break into their homes at night. One clip showed a woman clearly in a bedroom that was not Vincent's. Many of them were threatened with sharp objects, forced to comply, and then ordered to shower to wash off the evidence. In several tapes, Vincent got in the shower with them. He humiliated, insulted, and brutalized these women, and filmed every second. Josh feels sick at this point. The reality of living with this monster hits him all at once, and the deeper he goes through the bag, the worse it gets. He finds pictures of women's underwear, and even more disturbing to him were pictures of Vincent's current girlfriend. So, it's no longer a theory. Vincent Sanchez is dangerous. Josh calls their other roommate, Steve, and they together watch enough just to be sure that this is Vincent, and they immediately call the police. However, none of the women in any of this footage appear to be Megan, but the style, the aggression, the control, it all screams the same signature. So police returned to the house that night. This time they had probable cause and a warrant. They seize every tape, every photo, every piece of evidence, and what they were about to uncover would tie Vincent not only to burglary, but possibly to multiple violent personal items from his victims, like underwear or jewelry. Sharon hoped at least some of the women would recognize these objects from the evidence collected at Vincent's home. Can you even? So there's one more terrifying pattern in this. In every single case, this attacker knew things he should not have known. Deeply personal information about his victims. He knew where they studied, their nicknames, their boyfriends, details from their childhoods. He would act like he was in a relationship with these women, switching between violence and fake tenderness. After an assault, he would sometimes talk softly, sharing stories about religion and his life, like he wanted them to understand who he was and why he did this. He also appeared strangely familiar with their houses, as though he had been there before, moving familiarly through the rooms. So detectives decide to start with Dana, the woman from just days after Megan had vanished. She never mentioned that her attacker had worn a mask, but after everything they learned, Sharon was pretty convinced that Vincent was the guy. Dana had given incredibly detailed descriptions before. She said that the man drove a green Ford with beige seats. His bedroom had thick black curtains, and he himself had dark, spiky hair, brown eyes that slightly drooped in the corners, thick black eyebrows, high cheekbones, and a neatly trimmed mustache and beard. He had defined muscles in his arms and chest, and she guessed that he was around 173 centimeters. It took Dana every shred of courage to walk into that police lineup, even though they couldn't see her. The idea of facing faces, any face that might belong to her actual attacker, was absolutely unbearable, but she did it anyway. And when her eyes landed on Vincent Sanchez, she did not hesitate, not even a second. It was him. The next step was to go through every single victim one by one and see if any of them could identify the trophies that Vincent had stolen. Investigators also needed DNA samples from each woman to test against the evidence, especially the underthings and clothing. The assaults had started back in 1996, nearly 7 years prior, meaning that there could be even more victims that they didn't know about yet. But the real question, and the one that we're all here to answer, is where's Megan? Her case is still open and still unsolved, and her disappearance doesn't perfectly match Vincent's MO. But the detectives handling her case finally got permission to interview Josh, Vincent's roommate. When Josh pulls out the weapon from under his bed and shows it to them, detectives immediately ask, where's the cleaning rod for this? And Josh says, well, it's gone. It was always inside the barrel unless I was using it, but now it's just not there. And that changes everything. The last time Josh had cleaned the gun, the rod was in place, and now it's not. And investigators had already found the cleaning rod laying near Megan's abandoned rental car. When detectives asked to look around a bit more, Josh leads them into Vincent's room. They didn't have a full search warrant, only permission to observe, but it was enough. Their eyes immediately catch on the green military jacket with the orange lining, the same one that I mentioned that had been brushed off earlier. This time, it's not just another random item, it's a potential direct link. They photograph the jacket carefully, Megan disappeared just hours before, and Vincent, who had vanished during the exact same window, spent the early morning obsessively scrubbing down his vehicle. It didn't take a profiler to see what that probably meant. Jessica also told the police that the front of Vincent's car was damaged. When she asked him what happened, he said, "I got stuck in traffic and I had to bump into a car." But that didn't sound like a normal fender bender to detectives. It was a red flag, especially given the fact that it happened in the same window that Megan's disappearance had happened. Soon, more pieces start to surface. Vincent's close friend George told the police that on the night of July 4th, Vincent had been angry and on edge. The reason it traced back to something that had happened a month earlier. His girlfriend had a teenage daughter who had just graduated from high school, and the family threw a graduation party. Vincent went, but things started to go south when the woman's ex-husband showed up. Vincent picked a fight with him, and it nearly got physical. The family was furious, and they told Vincent that he was no longer welcome at family gatherings. So, when another celebration came around, July 4th, he wasn't invited, and the ex-husband was, and this fueled his rage even more. He told George he was furious, not just about being banned, but about everything. That he was unemployed, that he was broke, that his relationship was falling apart, his girlfriend was on the verge of leaving him. And for good reason, too. He had a history of domestic violence. Months earlier, she'd shown up to her family's house with a black eye, and her sister Elizabeth had confronted Vincent about it, and he had exploded. He told her that she better watch herself, and he said that he would even hurt her and the rest of her family if she didn't stay quiet. And he warned that if his girlfriend tried to leave, he would make sure that no one ever found her or her kids. So this guy is not just needing anger management, he's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. His girlfriend's family never approved of him, saying that the relationship was toxic from the start. They'd break up, make up, the cycle would go over and over. His possessiveness, aggression, and drinking were constant problems. He'd even moved in with her for a while, and she eventually left because of his behavior and drinking. He claimed that he was trying to get better and even started on medicine for his anger, but he had stopped his meds within recent months because he didn't like the way they made him felt. On July 4th, he kept calling and begging his girlfriend to take him back, and when she didn't answer, and her sister Elizabeth picked up the phone and told him to stop ruining her night and leave her alone, this rejection was like gasoline on a fire. Later that night, he told George, "If one more person makes me mad, I'm just gonna off him." He even hinted that he'd already done something bad, something so bad that George wouldn't want to be his friend anymore if he knew. And this wasn't the first time that Vincent had kind of joked about violence, or maybe not joked. He had told George once that he could take him to some quiet places where you could hide a body and no one would ever find it. Huh? Who talks like that? Some people would report strange behavior to the police, but how often do they really take it seriously? Let's be real. Many were scared that it'll backfire so that the suspect will come back after them if nothing happens. So George said he never thought Vincent meant any of it. He thought that he was just depressed and rambling. Detectives later learned that the sister of Vincent's girlfriend lived near Lindsay's house, where Megan had been on that night. Around 2:30, the same time Vincent was missing, Megan was leaving. Investigators believed he grabbed his gun, drove there drunk and angry, and when he couldn't get inside, saw Megan outside hugging her friend goodbye, and maybe the jealousy hit him, maybe rage. He followed her, tried to run her off the road, and when she fought back, he pulled the trigger. Everything started to fit, especially when a woman named Margie saw Vincent's mugshot on the news. She knew that face. Back in 2000, around 3 a.m., she'd been driving home after work when a man with his headlights off began following her. Tailgating her so closely, she feared she would crash. No matter where she turned, he stayed behind. Terrified, she spotted a police car in a parking lot, and she pulled in and told them what happened. She even remembered a firefighter decal on the back It is said that the air in the room changed instantly. Vincent went quiet, defensive, and refused to say another word about Megan. He swore that he had nothing to do with it, and eventually shut down the entire interview. But by then, police have to believe the worst. On August 3rd, search teams and cadaver dogs headed deep into the Ventura Canyons, where Vincent had once told George that he could hide things that would never be found. Nearly 3,000 people joined in on this search, including Megan's mother. They combed through the terrain inch by inch, a place known for its sunset and trails, now turned into a hunt for a body. Meanwhile, CSI teams scoured Megan's apartment for DNA to compare with the evidence from Vincent's house, especially the green jacket. A small hole near the bottom had caught their eye. No visible blood at first, but under a microscope, tiny droplets appeared, and tests confirmed that this was Megan's DNA. The car told an even darker story. Vincent had scrubbed it and shampooed the seats, but luminol revealed the truth. Blood everywhere, forming patterns too distinct to ignore. On the passenger seat, a long horizontal streak ran down the side, showing exactly where Megan had been sitting next to him during that final drive. Everything now points to Vincent Sanchez. Megan's jacket with the blood had been found in his house. His car shows traces of blood. The weapon matches. His friend's statements fill in the blanks. But the defense still had room to work. The car wasn't registered in Vincent's name. It belonged to his girlfriend, and other people had access to it. There was no single piece of evidence directly linking him to the car, the weapon, and the jacket at the same time. Investigators needed something more, just one tiny thread to connect all of these dots. And this is where it starts to get crazy, okay? Just stick with me. I know where it's long, okay? He had scrubbed everything in the car clean, leaving only faint traces of blood, so no way to prove it belonged to Megan. Search teams kept combing the canyons with no luck until one woman called the police, stating that her dog had acted strangely near a steep ravine while hiking. She had noticed the helicopter circling and thought, well, this can't be a coincidence. A cadaver dog named Bella was sent to the site, and as soon as she arrived, she pulled hard toward the ravine. So much so that even her handler got a smell of decay. Bella stopped at the edge of a 50-foot drop and sat down, a signal she used whenever she detected human remains. The team climbed down to follow her lead, and she guided them through a thick brush to a hidden spot and sat once again. This was it. The search was over. Crime scene investigators moved in, and they soon found what was left of Megan Barroso. They knew it was her, not because of her clothes, most of them were gone, but because of the ring that was still on her hand that she wore every day. When Megan's body was finally found, it had been lying in the wilderness for nearly a month, badly decomposed under the blazing sun. But something caught investigators' eyes. Tiny red glitter particles sparkling between her hair strands. It wasn't random. That glitter came from a popular brand trending at the time, sold in stores for makeup and hair decoration. And that night, Lizzy had sprinkled it on herself and the other girls to make their celebration shine a little bit more, never imagining that those sparkles would be evidence in her friend's murder. It took nearly 6 hours for the police to recover all of Megan's remains from the ravine. She had been buried under about a foot of trash, covered with branches and brush to hide her from sight. When the news of the discovery reached her family, everyone broke down. Despite all of the searching, they of course still hoped that Megan was captive somewhere. News of her death spread fast across the city, and the same people who had searched day and night, hanging posters and knocking on doors, now mourned her loss together. The autopsy This position raised some questions. Was she laying that way, or had she collapsed there in pain? But what caught detectives' attention the most is Lizzy had told detectives that Megan was wearing simple cotton underwear that night because she had started her cycle that day, which made lace pretty impractical. But that plain, simple cotton was gone, replaced by lace. Megan's pants were missing as well. The implication was clear. Her clothes had been removed, and she had likely been assaulted. Analysis confirmed she had been shot, but it had not pierced any major arteries or the spinal cord. It had stopped near her spine, meaning she had not passed away instantly or even lost consciousness right away. She had been awake, fully aware of her injuries, and feeling every moment. Her internal bleeding had progressed slowly, and if she had received medical help within the hour, she could have survived. This truth crushed everyone. The idea that she was still alive and alone and terrified, 50 foot down at the bottom of a ravine, was absolutely unbearable. Now, due to the state of her body, they could not get a DNA sample, but evidence from other victims filled in the blanks. Several women identified their own underthings among the things found in his house. Investigators learned that he had an obsession with lace underwear. His friends even joked with him that he could spot a woman wearing lace from across the room. One of the earliest victims was Jenny, an 18-year-old girl. Around 4 a.m. on June 14th, 1997, she woke up to find a man in her room with a sharp object. He threatened her, but Jenny screamed, and her father rushed in, and the intruder fled. But moments later, they realized that several pairs of her lace underwear were missing. For detectives, it became almost certain that that same scenario had repeated with Megan. Vincent always carried a black bag filled with underwear that he'd stolen from his victims, obsessed with the idea of control and humiliation. At this stage, his girlfriend is finally cooperating with police. It wasn't easy. She seemed frightened and ashamed, but it was hard for her to accept that the guy that she loved and trusted was a predator. But she was a victim too. Investigators equipped her with a wiretap phone line, and they asked her to call him, hoping he might confess or slip up, but he denied everything. He insisted that the police were framing him or exaggerating his charges. This man is accused of 11 assaults and 1 murder, is claiming that he's misunderstood. Oh, you're misunderstood, buddy. Meanwhile, detectives keep tightening. They revisit the detail that at first cracked the investigation. And this is what I told you is absolutely bananas. The red glitter found in Megan's hair. They collected samples from Vincent's car, his seats, his trunk, and floor mats using adhesive tape to lift microscopic particles. Under the microscope, the results were clear. That same shimmering red glitter appeared on the car seats, the trunk lining, and even his jacket. It was the same kind of glitter that Lizzy had sprinkled on Megan and her friends that night. Just like that, glitter that once made the girls shine at a party became evidence that tied a killer to his crime. Under the microscope, they saw that each speck was hexagonal, with one side red and the other silver, which made it shimmer in the light. It was so microscopic that it could easily cling to anything and spread everywhere. Impossible to fully clean up. When the weapon was examined, investigators found one single flake of that same glitter. Just one. And it was discovered close enough to the loop. So now this substance has been discovered on Megan's hair, on her jacket, and on the weapon. On August 10th of 2001, Vincent stood trial facing 62 charges ranging from home invasion, stalking, to physical assault and murder. evidence, Vincent maintained his innocence and never shared his version of what happened that night. But still, investigators managed to piece it together. They believe that he had spotted Megan by chance, followed her, and attacked her. She fit the pattern, and whether he was driven by rage or obsession, he chose her. The next day, he returned to the canyon to make sure she was hidden, where he'd likely dumped her there in a rush before going home to scrub his car. Autopsy revealed that Megan's cause of death was severe internal infection. The bullet had passed through her intestines, releasing bacteria into her abdomen and causing a slow, excruciating death from blood poisoning. Vincent later tried to unalive himself using a sharp piece of metal in his cell, but he failed. Nearly 2 years after the murder, his trial began on May 5th of 2003. Prosecutors portrayed him as methodical, not only violent, but disturbingly organized. Each attack planned, he broke into homes, wore masks, restrained his